Hey, I sent out an article and maybe we can put it in the chat later for anyone that isn't on the email list to have it. But it was a Guardian article in 2016 by Laura Bates. Does anybody remember the name Laura Bates?
No, it doesn't sound familiar.
Say that again.
No, I don't.
You don't? Okay. Well, I remember the name and I'm drawing a blank at the books. She wrote a few books on when it comes to patriarchy and sexism. Or I think it's oh, I can't remember which one she wrote. I'll have to look it up in a little bit maybe and put it in the chat. But there, some of you may have read them as well. But anyway, so there's a Guardian article that I want to look at. But before we do that, I just kind of wanted to do kind of like a introduction real quick. As we look at the counterfeit. And I put up here, can you see the board okay? My writing's probably pretty bad because I did that in a hurry, but can you see that? You can see that up there, the tape?
Well, we can see the board and what you've written, but we cannot see what is written. It's a little small.
Yeah, okay. I'll go through it and tell you what it is, and then I might redo it and take a picture of it later. But this is from, if you remember, Elder Test did some presentations, quite a few presentations, one of which was called The Three Structures, I think. Because that's where this originally, I think, came from the three structures. But then there were other studies that followed through that this same thing was shown in those other studies. So the three structures were Adventism, which she labeled as modern Israel, the papacy as the counterfeit, and Protestantism as the In God We Trust group. She was showing out the two histories of failure, so failure, then success. So Adventism, she marked the Millerite history, 1798 to 1844, that's 46 years. Then the 1888 history, and in our history, the history of the 144,000. So it was failure, and success. The counterfeit, she marked 1899 to 1945, again, 46 years. And that was the time of Pope Pius the 12th. I don't think the whole time was Pope Pius the 12th. I'd have to go review the history. Can't remember if he was at the beginning. I think he was at the beginning. Or is he Pope Pius the 12th is he during World War II? Maybe somebody remembers that. But she marks Pope Pius the 12th there. And then 1989 with John Paul II. And then 2001 with Benedict and Francis. Again, a failure, and then success. Then she marked Protestantism as the third structure, 1863 to 1900. And this period here was the Christian Amendment, which we're going to look at a little bit more, when they were trying to change the Constitution to make us a Christian nation, that history. And then in the 1950s, the Judeo-Christian, when they take on the rename themselves, remake themselves in the 1950s, and that history, you have Billy Graham in this history as well. And then moving forward to 1979 to the Sunday Law, the new Christian right. So you had three histories: the Christian Amendment, you had Judeo-Christian, and then our history, the history that is marked as a history for them as success, is the new right, the new Christian right. So failure, success for all three of these structures. Anybody, any thoughts or comments before we? Did everybody remember that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So before we get to the article, I just have a few things that I do want to read. And I'm gonna take if we go back to the board, I'll put it back up. Okay, so that was from like I said, several presentations, and I don't remember, I think it began in the three structures. I don't remember, maybe she was building it in one before that, but there were several presentations that were done featuring that structure and going through it. So then we talked a little bit, mentioned on Wednesday, the Ship of Alexandria Revisited. And I wondered if anybody has their Bible open, if you would open up to the book of Acts 28. I think it's verse 8. Somebody find it, and I'll make sure that that's what it is. I'll have somebody read it. No, that's not the one. We want to go to a different one. Give me just a second. Susan, you probably remember which verse it is, the Castor and Pollux verse. Oh, here we go. Verse 11. If somebody wants to read Acts 28, verse 11.
I could read it.
Sure.
There's some noise in my background, but I can read it.
Okay,
You said Acts 28, 11.
correct.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, here we go. And after 3 months, we departed in a ship of Alexandria, and which had wintered in the Isles, whose sign was Castor and Pollux.
Okay,
Pollux.
thank you. So on that note of Castor and Pollux, we're just reading that because we know that the shipwreck is when? When is shipwreck?
Sunday law.
Sunday law. Okay. And so then at Sunday law on the island of Melita, another ship called Castor and Pollux comes to pick them up. So I'm gonna read a quote and just ask the question that Elder Tess asked. What arrives to take Paul to the close of probation? Anybody?
Was it the ship of Alexandria? Another ship?
It is a ship of Alexandria, but with what you just read, what is identified as that ship of Alexandria?
Castor and Pollux.
Castor and Pollux. Okay, so in that particular study, the ship of Alexandria Revisited, she asked the question, what arrives to take Paul to the close of probation? And the answer she gives, it's the counterfeit. So what is she saying?
Well, she says the counterfeit, and the Bible says Castor and Pollux.
Hope you faded away. Say that again.
Well, Elder Tess said the counterfeit, and the Bible says Castor and Pollux. So I'm thinking it's one of the same.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so then we're going to go on to, we're going to look at homage. And I'm going to read just a few quotes from this is from the same study. And she says in the Great Controversy 442.1, the prediction that it will speak as a dragon and exercise all the power of the first beast plainly foretells the development of the spirit of intolerance and persecution that was manifested by the nations represented by the dragon and the leopard beast. There's a lot in this passage that makes it famous, but I'll keep going to my main point. Quoting again, in the statement that the beast with 2 horns causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, indicates that the authority of this nation is to be exercised in enforcing some observance, which shall be an act of homage to the papacy. So that's the great controversy, 442, paragraph 1, that it's enforcing some observance, which shall be an act of homage to the papacy. So another quote from her in that particular study. So the point I want to bring out of this, at the Sunday law, the United States pays homage to the papacy. How does the United States pay homage to the papacy? I'm asking that. How does the United States pay homage to the papacy?
Through persecution?
No, not quite. I wouldn't put it that way. Anybody else?
Would
I'm
it be
just-
through,
Go ahead.
would it be through the United States, following through with the understanding of their version of equality, which isn't even equality, just cultural feminism?
Which would mean what? What does paying homage mean?
Being in
Accepting,
line with,
yeah, accepting.
So I'll keep reading. She says, how does the United States pay homage to the papacy? It copies it. Intolerance. In the words itself, what does it mean to pay homage to something? And I'm going to continue her quote. By enforcing an observance, because that's back to the previous one, in enforcing some observance, which shall be an act of homage. So from the great controversy, Ellen White is saying that it's an act, it's an observance, which will be an act of homage. So this observance is an act of homage. And what she's saying in this next paragraph is that homage to the papacy, the United States paying homage to the papacy, is by copying the papacy, copying the intolerance. So by enforcing an observance, that's what it says in the passage. It doesn't say intolerance is the homage or persecution is the homage. The very last sentence gives us the word and its definition. Enforcing some observance equals an act of homage to the papacy. Let's see. The act of homage is the enforcement of an observance. It's in enforcing the observance of something that is the act of homage. Anybody want to comment?
Elaine?
Yeah,
The only thought I have is that and it makes most sense when I think of it this way, is to realize that this enforcement, this act of homage, of following, the same policy, to me, when we think about when is the Sunday law, and we realize that it's, as our elders have pointed out clearly, it's not a single event. We can say, oh, that was a Sunday law that just came along yesterday. But it's an act of filling a cup. And I think the United States has gone a long way towards filling that cup already, but it's not completely full yet. It will be at Sunday law.
yes. So she says, this is another question out of this particular study. What goes wrong at the Sunday law is the United States pays homage to the papacy. And what United States is this? So the United States, at the Sunday law, the United States pays homage. What United States is this?
The seventh kingdom.
That's not the answer in here. We know that we do enter into the seventh kingdom, but that's not the part of this story. Think of the three structures that we just did. There was three structures.
Is it apostate Protestantism?
Yes, her answer is this is Protestant America. So Protestant America pays homage to the papacy. But we also know things have continued to further develop, and you include culture. And that would be when you go into culture and cultural feminism and so on. So we might get to some of that when we look at the counterfeit, look at a few things on the counterfeit. So she puts in the definition for homage as the idea of submission, and she pointed out the word submission and the idea of respect. Submission and respect. So we know, and what we're going to look at now is from the study of homage through hatred, is the United States friends, or Protestantism friends with the Catholic Church? And we're going to look at that history now. And she referred to, and then I'll quote her paraphrases. She referred to where to find the Catholic mirror. I'm sure probably if most of us, if not all of us, at one point in time have read that back in our journey somewhere. But she gives the reference for it, and I'll give it to you if you, I'll type it in the chat. Give me just 1 second. Okay, so it's where in Ellen White's writings, I think it's in the Pioneer writings, but that's the reference for it, where they quoted or put in the entire article, all the articles. I think there was 4 of them. So let's see, going on to, I'm going to read what she says, and then we'll work our way towards our article. So what the Catholic Church is saying to Protestantism, and this is what the Catholic Church is saying. This is her paraphrase. Through these 4 editorials, the Catholic Church proved that the Sabbath was never changed to Sunday in the New Testament, that Sunday keeping is purely an institution of the Roman Catholic Church. And then Catholicism looks to Protestantism, and they openly mock them. So Catholicism is mocking Protestantism after they say that there's no change in the New Testament. So Catholicism mocks Protestantism, and they say, you hate us, Protestants, you hate us, Catholics. You're threatened by us. In fact, you're desperately trying to change your constitution to show that no Catholic can be a true American. But every time you keep Sunday with no biblical evidence, you can do so, you honor us. So with mockery, if you read not necessarily in the words, but in the tone of those articles, the Catholic Church was saying to Protestantism, thank you for your homage. And I hope you were able to pick up the tone and get where that's coming from. So in the Catholic mirror is mocking Protestants because they say the Sabbath was never changed to Sunday in the Bible. And by keeping the Sabbath, you're actually paying homage to us. They're paying homage even though they see Catholicism as the threat. And if you remember some of those studies, she went through and showed a lot of the old cartoons, political cartoons and such that showed that there's no friendship between Protestant America and Catholicism. And so the act of homage, the act of the United States paying homage to the papacy is in copying what the papacy does, not because they're friends. And we'll go on to read where she shows that it's despite themselves. So another quote from her, Ellen White is saying it's in the act of homage. It's in the act that the homage lays. And in 1893, Catholicism said to Protestantism, hate the mother all you like. Your Sunday keeping came from me. And that's homage. You need to find no non-existent deep state conspiracy. That's the act of homage. to copy, do what the papacy is doing. The United States does what the papacy does, and that's the act of homage. So Great Controversy 446.1, whoever knowingly keeps Sunday gives supreme honor and shows their mark of allegiance to the Pope of Rome. So this is, remember, this is back in the history where they're trying to change, based on the fact that they're trying to change the Constitution and make a Christian amendment, calling this a Christian nation. So that was that history. And continuing on in Great Controversy 448, paragraph 3, the Catholic Church declares, quote, the observance of Sunday by the Protestants is a homage they pay to Catholicism in spite of themselves, end quote. So in spite of themselves, regardless of what they wanted to do, the very act is homage. So by keeping Sunday, they're paying homage to the papacy, even though they are not friends in an agreement with the papacy. So they're giving homage whether they, despite themselves. So some key points that she pointed out. Catholics, or Catholicism, excuse me, hated by Protestantism. They persecuted Catholics during the nativist riots, and we did look at some of that as well. She brought that up and suggested people study that. We did look at that, the nativist riots, and it was in 1844. And if you access that study on the website, I did put all those quotes in there, all the information that some of the information anyway, on the nativist riots and what Protestantism actually did to Catholics in that history. Another key point, Protestantism feared the infiltration of the Jesuits in the Catholic Church, and being determined to protect themselves from Catholicism by declaring it to be a Protestant nation. So that's why they wanted to actually separate themselves by making this a Christian nation, making the amendment to make it a Christian nation, made the United States distinct and separate from the Catholic Church, even though they were keeping Sunday, which was an act of homage to the Catholic Church. So despite themselves, they were paying homage despite what they were willed to do, despite their hatred. Okay, so there's a couple of quotes here that I'm going to read. This is off of Vatican News, the Vatican News website. And it was just a short, very short article. I only pulled a couple things out of it. The dignity of women and girls must be protected. Pope Francis upholds importance of protecting dignity and caring for women and girls when addressing participants in the international conference, Women Building a Culture of Encounter Interreligiously. We're going to pick up that word encounter here in a minute. So I'll reread that. Pope Francis upholds importance of protecting dignity of and caring for women and girls when addressing participants in the international conference, and the conference title was Women Building a Culture of Encounter Interreligiously. And this quote, I'm pretty sure this quote here is, it didn't have Pope Francis next to it, but by the way the article was written, I'm pretty sure it's from him. The fact that your conference, so it's got to be the Pope speaking, the best that I could tell. The fact that your conference is devoted to listening to the experiences and perspectives of women is all the more valuable, since our quest for peace must increasingly involve women. Because women bestow care and life upon the world, they are themselves a path towards peace. So maybe I'll open up for brief discussion and get your thoughts on that. I'll reread that last piece. Because women bestow care and life upon the world, they are themselves a path towards peace. What is he saying?
Sounds like it's not equality. We did study this. It's been a while back, though.
I'll put that quote in the chat.
Sounds like intrinsic strength. Feminine, what do you call that? Forgot the term we use.
What does it mean by they bestow care and life? Women are nurturing. Yes,
Yeah, that's a good
Yes,
one.
yes. Cultural, yeah.
yes. So women are nurturing, they bestow care, and what's the other word? Life. What does that mean?
They're mothers.
They're mothers.
They
They're
have
they're
babies.
baby producers.
Yep.
Yeah. They're baby producers. Okay. And this was, yeah, this was from the same article because I have a few here. While lamenting that the activity of encounter is becoming rare, the Holy Father stressed its practice is one of the greatest gifts you can offer to your families, communities, and societies. And I'll post that one in there too. Because this word encounter came up and I don't think I'd ever heard it before. And so I looked it up and I don't know that I found the right answer, but maybe we can discuss it together and come up with it. So while lamenting that the activity of encounter is becoming rare, the Holy Father stressed its practice is one of the greatest gifts you can offer to your families, communities, and societies.
Sounds like a sacrifice, like a woman has to sacrifice her life and have babies. You're doing it for your God and country. That's what it reminds me of. You are responsible to do this. It's your sacrifice to have these babies.
I'm going to read from a second article, NCR, the National Catholic Reporter Online, because I was looking up that phrase, and I think that quote came from this second article. And it's just little brief articles, but I was looking up, trying to understand this, what they mean by encounter. And you can go back to when he first became, and I think that's what this article does. I might have it, if I have it open still, I'll post it. I don't remember if I do. Oh yeah, I do. Okay. Because I think this article was back when not long after he became Pope. There's the article. And we'll go ahead and do a share screen. Okay. Mark where I'm at, just there. Okay, so Pope Francis and encounter. Yes, this was 2013. So what is meant by this phrase? It is no mere pop psychology term, but touches the deepest part of the Christian vocation. The capacity to encounter is about the Christian stance towards the world and especially towards other persons. The ability achieved through grace to stand towards the world as Christ stood towards the world. In his recent video talk to his fellow Argentinian teens on the occasion of the feast of San Cayetano, the Pope concluded with these words, which give a precise example of what encounter is all about. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming here today. Thank you for everything you carry in your hearts. Jesus loves you very much. San Cayetano loves you very much. We ask only one thing, that you reach out. I don't think I can highlight there. That you reach out and that you go and seek out and encounter the most needy. So who's this encountering about? In this article anyways.
The most needy, it says.
The most needy. So I will finish the quote and then we'll go back and continue on because I'm trying to get, if you remember, Elder Tess quoted from several articles about how something the Pope says versus what he does, if you remember that. So I wanted to understand this word encounter, and there is this connection that he makes, that go and seek out and encounter the most needy, but not alone, no, with Jesus in San Cayetano. Does this mean going to convince someone to become a Catholic? No, no, no. You're just reaching out to meet him. He is your brother. It's interesting. I guess your brother is the only one that's needy, but then again, to him, your brother is going to be male and female, I would think. I hope I'm saying that right. He's including humanity. That is enough. You reach out, either that or he's including only men, and you, through the man, the woman is saved. I don't know that I have the answer to that. I haven't looked into to how they say that or how they feel on that. Maybe somebody else has understanding of that. So you reach out to help them. The rest is done by Jesus, by the Holy Spirit. Remember well, with San Cayetano, we need encounter the neediest. With Jesus, we who are in need, we reach out to those who are even more in need. And maybe Jesus will show us the path to meet with those who need it most. When you meet those most in need, your heart will begin to grow bigger, bigger, and bigger, because reaching out multiplies our capacity to love, and encounter with others makes our heart bigger. Take courage. I don't know what to do on my own. No, no, no. With Jesus and San Cayetano, may God bless you and this feast day. Okay. So he's emphasizing this encounter is with the most, for the most needy. And I hope that comes across well, the most needy. So that was early on what his version of encounter is. So keep in mind that the first article then, let me see where did I read it at? The first article, which was more recent, the dignity of women and girls must be protected. And this is a conference, an international conference called Women Building a Culture of Encounter Interreligiously. And I believe it was different faiths that were all there. Women Building a Culture of Encounter. I might have the wrong connections going here, but I believe he's also, as Christine is pointing out, women who bestow care and life upon the world, we have to treat them with dignity. We have to uphold the importance of protecting the dignity of and caring for women and girls, because they offer care and life upon the world. He also talks about, it does mean sharing the faith. Yes, I believe that is true. To influence, to be influenced, basically evangelism through good works, suffering migrants, abused women and children, because he actually advocates for to stop violence against women. And I don't know if I think it's in the other article that we're going to read, the one by Laura Bates. So one last one from also Vatican News. This was Pope calls for respect of the dignity of all women. He says that there's so much yet to be done. He observed there is still so much to be done by each and every one of us to promote the equal dignity of women so that it concretely is recognized. He recalled that social and political institutions have the fundamental duty to protect and promote the dignity of every human person, offering women, the bearers of life, the necessary living conditions so they are able to accept the gift of life and ensure their children a dignified existence. So I'll put that quote in there. And that's the last one. And I'll put the link in there so you can look at it. Whoops. Wrong window. Okay. So he recalled that social and political institutions have the fundamental duty to protect and promote the dignity of every human person, offering women, comma, the bearers of life, comma, the necessary living conditions so they are able to accept the gift of life and ensure their children a dignified existence. What is he saying? Women are the bearers of life, right? And you need to provide for them, right? Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, give them a nice place to reproduce.
To reproduce. I hear, it was just me and my past and sarcasm, but I hear, take care of the little women. Quote, little women. It's our job to take care of the helpless little women. And it's not about giving them equality, even though in some aspects they talk equality, but it's giving women what they need, and in their eyes, what they need is to be taken care of, and make sure that you uphold their dignity, and yet make sure that they have the necessary living conditions, so that they are able to accept the gift of life. The gift of life, meaning, I'm pretty sure it's not talking about salvation there. It's talking about, if you look in the context, the bearers of life, give them the necessary conditions so they're able to accept the gift of life, a baby, and ensure their children a dignified existence.
It sounds very similar to Women's Bill of Rights. I mean, I know the Women's Bill of Rights, I don't think I read that yesterday, the Women's Bill of Rights. It doesn't necessarily speak about reproduction per se, but it does talk about protection for the women, and it's exclusively for what they define as women. So I mean, it sounds very similar.
Yeah, that's what I was catching too when I was reading these. That for one, the women are helpless. So even though they might be equal as a human being, speaking on their way they talk, they're human beings. But they're helpless and needy and need a protector. That's how I understand what he's saying there. And I don't know if it's Penny or Bob, women need to care for their families and society as a whole. So with that, we'll go ahead and read the article. And I'll pull this up on the share screen. Is the Pope a feminist? And well, it's complicated. And this is 2016 article, and this is Laura Bates, 2016. In his document on family life, Amoris Laetitia, the Pope appears more progressive. Pope appears more progressive than we might have thought, but as long as he is head of the Catholic Church, he can only go so far. Amoris Laetitia, the Joy of Life, the 256-page document penned by Pope Francis and released last week, this is 2016, contains unexpectedly nuanced discussions of issues like gender stereotypes, domestic abuse, and other forms of violence against women. So, is the Pope a feminist? And she says, well, it's complicated. It's a question that's been asked on numerous occasions, but the document, which includes quotes from bishops' meetings and from religious and other texts, the document explicitly discusses feminism twice. The Pope states that women's rights still need to be promoted and heavily criticizes domestic violence, female genital mutilation, and the commercialization and exploitation of women's bodies in the media, writing, so this is a quote, "There are those who believe that many of today's problems have arisen because of feminine emancipation. This argument, however, is not valid. It is false, untrue, a form of male chauvinism. The equal dignity of men and women makes us rejoice to see old forms of discrimination disappear. So we know that people blame the problems, many of the problems on society, as he is saying, and when it comes to men in particular, that feminism, or women, as he puts it, feminine emancipation, brought these problems. I'm going to pause real quick and read Mary's comment. That message makes the counterfeit look really good and will draw people to it. Only they will still be within patriarchy. Yes, women and currently people not equal to men, but might have a little relief and protection under patriarchy. Sarah says the only thing women need is the men to remove their knees off the, yes. So, okay, so let's see, we read the first one. The argument, however, is not valid. It's false, untrue, a form of male chauvinism. It all sounds good. The equal dignity of men and women makes us rejoice to see old forms of discrimination disappear. And she comments, so far so good. However, he goes on to say, if certain forms of feminism have arisen, which we must consider inadequate, we must nonetheless see in the women's movement the working of the Spirit for a clearer recognition of the dignity and rights of women. So there's that word again she's used, or this is his word, dignity and rights of women. What does he mean by dignity of women? In patriarchy, or even with the Pope, what did he say the woman's role is?
Nurturing.
Nurturing,
What else?
having children.
And having children. Got to protect their dignity. You got to protect their dignity. Okay, so this sounds more suspicious of the difference between the sound principles of a wider belief system and the potential for corruption or abuse in the way those principles are applied by the people who act in its name, which might be considered somewhat ironic coming from the head of the Catholic Church. That said, he does acknowledge that it is legitimate and indeed desirable that women wish to study, work, and have personal goals, but seems to set this against the need for women to fulfill their maternal duties, declaring in the same section, quote, the weakening of this maternal presence with its feminine qualities poses a grave risk to our world. So women have to stay in that maternal role. So if it is not exactly waving a feminist, he is not exactly waving a feminist banner. In many ways, however, the Pope is more progressive than we might have dared to expect. He strikes a blow against gender stereotypes, writing that masculinity and femininity are not rigid categories, and saying that we should not think, quote, that it is not really masculine to cultivate art or dance, or not very feminine to exercise leadership, end quote. He also advocates shared chores and parental responsibilities, quoting, it is possible, for example, that a husband's way of being masculine can be flexibly adapted to the wife's work schedule. Taking on domestic chores or some aspects of raising children does not make him any less masculine or imply failure, irresponsibility, or cause for shame, end quote. He even describes one of the Bible passages as having been written, quote, in the context of a patriarchal culture in which women were considered completely subordinate to men, end quote. He also seems aware of the potential modern misinterpretation of such dated texts, later writing, quoting, every form of sexual submission must be clearly rejected. This includes all improper interpretations of the passage in the letter to the Ephesians, where Paul tells women to be subject to your husbands, end quote. But while talking the talk of equality, the Pope doesn't always manage to walk the walk. Much like his stance on gay marriage, he seems keen to speak the language of inclusivity and progression without actually making any concrete concessions. In a section entitled, You and Your Wife, an indicator of the assumed reader, Francis quotes the Bible description of a man searching for a wife who will be a helper fit for him. He speaks of the need for discrimination to disappear and of growing reciprocity, I hope I say that word, reciprocity, within families. Yet, in the very next paragraph, describes the important role men play, quote, with regard to the protection and support of their wives and children. So who is man? Who are the males?
The superior husbands.
The superior husbands. They're the protector and supporter. He dedicates an entire section to the need for sex education, citing the potential negative impact of influences like online pornography, but seems to criticize the practice of teaching young people about contraception and says he dislikes the term safe sex because he thinks it makes a potential baby sound like an enemy. He speaks out against domestic violence, but praises the strength of a love that never gives up and says that separation must be considered as a last resort after all other reasonable attempts at reconciliation have proved vain, even in cases of violence and abuse where he admits that separation becomes morally necessary. So you should do everything you can to keep that marriage together, even under violence. And it's
That's what I was just going to comment, because
Yeah.
they were so against divorcing, but you know, their members were not able to take the communion if they had been divorced.
Yeah, I read that too. I don't know if is it in this article? That might be where I
I
read it today.
don't think so. I think we were reading this from more recent things about Francis and the changes he's making in the Catholic Church with their dogmas.
It might be in this article. I know I just read that today.
Yeah.
I was reading from a lot of different sources, but that yeah, when it comes to divorce, go ahead and repeat what you said. Got distracted, sorry.
Oh, you want me to say what I?
Yeah,
Yeah, I said there was, yeah, because of the fact that if there was divorce in families, then they were not able to take
communion.
communion.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's he's still holding that up as the rules now.
I know I just read it. It might be in this article, but I just read it in something that I read today. So Sarah says it's funny because that is the only that is only the woman that is expected to tolerate. Yeah. And then Mary says double tongue of the serpent. He walks both lanes at the same time, maintaining gender roles and promoting progressive lifestyle. And very confusing, yes.
Very deceiving.
And so Fell brought up the Women's Bill of Rights, because that's also how I was, in my mind, seeing the Women's Bill of Rights. It's as deceptive as the Pope is, and yet it's doing the same thing the Pope is. Okay, so it's ironic that he describes, let's see. Yeah, okay, it's ironic that he describes motherhood as one of the rights derived from women's inalienable human dignity. So here's your dignity you got to uphold. Inalienable human dignity, the right of motherhood. If I'm paraphrasing that poorly, please correct me. It's ironic that he describes motherhood as one of the rights derived from women's inalienable human dignity, while he continues to uphold the church's centuries-old position on reproductive decisions. No alleged right, this is him quoting him, she's quoting him, no alleged right to one's own body can justify a decision to terminate that life. So while you might think you have the right to own your own body, it doesn't justify a decision to terminate a baby, terminate a pregnancy. The Pope's tentative.
Which means,
Go ahead.
which means you don't have the right to your own body.
Exactly. Exactly. Alleged. No alleged right. The Pope's tentative overtures towards feminism are exciting, but they're meaningless if simply overlaid upon existing unequal foundations that he makes no attempt to change. So is the Pope more liberal in his attitudes about gender? Is the Pope more liberal in his attitudes about gender equality than any pontiff before him? Almost definitely. Might he have a positive impact by updating ideas about gender stereotypes and roles? Hopefully. But is he a feminist? While he continues to preside over an institution that restricts women and prevents equality in so many ways, not by my definition, no. I thought it would be good to look at the counterfeit a bit here. There's a couple other things I have open, but I don't, let me stop share screen real quick. But I didn't get to go through as much as I would have liked to have. But there was one, I don't know if I have it open. No, I do not. Wish I would have saved. There was another one that I had that I wished I would have saved and I didn't. Okay, so we'll just go back to real quick on the board anyways. Looking at, and we won't draw the whole line out, but we're just gonna roughly put up here, we know we have 1989. And we're looking at the counterfeit. And you have 2001. And then you have Sunday law, close probation, and second advent. So you have this history here, and we have 2019, 2021, where you have feminism, right? And what do you have here? Radical, right? But in this history, going back to what we started with Acts 27, in taking first structure here, you have, I'm going to erase that counterfeit. You have Protestantism, well, going all the way back, right? But you have Protestantism, right? And then what did we see here? From the ship of Alexandria revisited, what did we see here? Acts 28, verse 11.
Castor and Pollux.
Castor and Pollux. So you have the true, which was, you had Paul represented in the story, and Paul is representing the true church. And then over here you have Castor and Pollux, which is what? What did we define this as?
We said counterfeit?
The counterfeit, right?
Right.
Okay. Any thoughts? On what we've gone through so far?
I don't know, with application. Is that what we're looking at in our time?
We're looking at, Elder Test, what Elder Test said, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and, I'm
But the counterfeit is at the Sunday law, right?
the counterfeit is at the Sunday law, yeah.
So if we're seeing it on the line in our time, we're seeing that happen right now. Catholic Church is, under Pope Francis, is becoming liberal.
Becoming,
Is that-
liberal, is that what
Can you
said?
say that? Can you say that? It is, it's not conservative.
Wouldn't it be that, trying to find an article. If anybody has that article from the UN that was written a while back, that's the one I'm looking for. If somebody will
Mm.
pull that up.
What was it called?
Unequal rights?
Are human rights equal rights, something like that?
Yeah, yeah.
Because I'm trying to find that one. I meant to get that one, try to get that one earlier, but I didn't, I forgot to get it. I do have an article, if nobody finds it, by Hillary Clinton. Power shortage, women's rights are human rights, but rights are nothing without power to claim them. So maybe we'll go to that one right now.
I'll look and see if I have that on my phone, on that article on human rights.
Okay. I'll go ahead and pull this one up for now. And it was one from the media broadcast as well. Written by Hillary Clinton, she reflects back on 25 years since her 1995 speech. She discusses the pandemic, the 2016 election, and why we're still so far from equality. We cannot forget that we're all still living through this internal test, and it will not come to an end this side of the second advent. As women leaders are placed onto boards and into positions of leadership within the movement, is it any wonder that this movement continues to be shaken? So this was written back a little while back by Elder Tess. So what's holding us back? Although sexism and structural barriers are in many places no longer legal, they're still very much with us today. Instead, they're cultural. And so this is an article by Hillary Clinton as she's reflecting back through the past 25 years. If we could have somebody read, I would love the help. Somebody want to read?
Yeah, I could read some of that.
Okay, thanks.
Let me see. Power shortage. Women's rights are human rights. The rights are nothing without power to claim them. Giving speeches was not usually a problem for me, but a lot was riding on this one. And I had a genuine case of nerves as I took the stage. Before me were 1,500 delegates, mainly women of every race and ethnicity, who had traveled to Beijing for the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women. What they all had in common in that moment was a daunting impassibility It was September 5th, 1995. I had spent weeks writing and rewriting my speech. I wanted it to be bold, accessible, and unambiguous. I also thought hard about getting the delivery right. Women are often criticized if they show too much emotion in public. And I wanted to make sure my tone didn't obscure the message, hence the nerves. I started talking. As I spoke, each line was translated in real time into dozens of languages, creating a gap between me and the audience. Hundreds of delegates stared back blankly. This was my chance to change the way the world thought about women, and it didn't seem to be going well. On the flight to Beijing, I had pored over drafts of my speechwriter, Lisa Muscatine, and the foreign policy experts crammed into my cabin. Madeleine Albright, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, had asked me a simple question. What do you want to accomplish with this speech? My answer had been equally simple. I want to push the envelope as far as I can on behalf of women and girls. I have long believed, supported by Everest of evidence, the relegating women's health, education, and economic participation to the margins of foreign and domestic policy is ruinous not just for women, but for entire nations. The Beijing conference represented a rare opportunity to focus the world's attention on the status of women and girls. I wanted to break the silence about atrocities being committed in specific regions of the world, as well as the injustices and abuses that are universal, including in developed democracies such as my own. Most of all, I wanted to argue that it was no longer acceptable to talk about human rights and women's rights as separate topics. They were one and the same, and I was determined to make people hear this.
Can I read something real quick? Pause you
Sure.
for 1 second. We read
Yeah.
this on Wednesday night, and this was from the United Nations Human Rights Council. The corrosion of women's human rights is a litmus test for the human rights standards of the whole society. Because I think if I'm understanding what she's saying is the same thing. They're one and the same. Human rights, let's see, human rights and women's rights. And I was thinking about this today, because I don't want to exclude any marginalized people. But I was thinking about when it comes to the line of Eden to Eden, you had, what was the first sin with Eve? Gender, right?
Right.
And then you had Cain and Abel, you had worship. Then you had
Racism, right?
Huh?
Racism,
And you had racism, right?
right?
And then when you go to the Millerite history, because we see on the chiasm, You go to the Millerite history, it's racism and then worship, but I still think there's a whole lot more to it because the 1888 history is, you can still see, you can see equality clearly in the 1888 history. And then women's rights, gender, because it had been emphasized throughout this message that gender is the test. But I think it's interesting that quote, the corrosion of women's human rights is a litmus test for the human rights standards of the whole society, and take what she is saying, that human rights and women's rights, they're no longer acceptable to talk about human rights and women's rights as separate topics. They are one and the same.
Right.
When we look at, we're at the final test, even though we know gender is the test, the UN, I'm just pointing out the UN and Hillary Clinton are marking inclusive of all human rights with women's rights. So this is the big failure at the end. I don't know if I expressed that very well, but hopefully you're getting the idea of what I'm saying.
Yeah, you're saying they're interconnected, and they are.
Yeah. So even though gender is the test,
Right.
we've stacked up this failure of equality all around. And the conclusion of the matter, I guess you would say, the conclusion of the matter is gender rights. You failed this, and this all along the way. You failed gender, now you failed them all.
They all fall under inequity.
Yeah.
Back in the US, the idea of my attendance in Beijing had been controversial. I was fresh off a bruising flight for healthcare reform, a topic some considered far beyond the job description of a first lady. A year earlier, I had been burned in effigy at a protest against the health care plan.
That
Today-
means they made like a,
Yeah, like a figure of her,
yeah.
likeness of her, and set her ablaze kind of thing. Today, I take this as a compliment. Back then, it stung a little. Members of Congress had scoffed at the idea of an international gathering focused on women's issues. Republican Senator Phil Gramm declared that the conference was shaping up to be an unsanctified festival of anti-family and anti-American sentiment. Officials at the State Department were nervous. A first lady talking about foreign policy on the world stage. What if I create some kind of international incident? They were also concerned on going to Beijing would implicitly condone China's dismissal of human rights record. I shared those concerns, and later, when I led the State Department, I made sure that China's human rights record was a focus of investigation and criticism. But in the end, I made my position clear. I was either going to travel to the conference as a leader of an official American delegation, or as I was going to buy a seat on a commercial airline and attend as a private citizen. The opposition melted away. Now, staring out at the delegates in front of me, I had a fleeting thought. What if this was a mistake? But if there's anything I've learned in life, it is to keep going. I spoke about women and girls who are working to advance education, healthcare, economic independence, legal rights, and political participation. With barely concealed rage, I talked about the use of rape as a tactic of war and the violence women are subjected to in their own homes. I criticized China for its policy of cohesive family planning. I didn't know it at the time, but the Chinese government cut off the television feed of my speech to the rest of the convention center, where thousands of people could not fit into the hall for watching. A few years ago, however, I got an email from a friend who had been walking around a department store in Beijing when the music faded and my speech started to play over the loudspeakers. I've always wondered what subversive person managed that. As I went on, I could feel a change in the atmosphere. Delegates, even or especially from countries I was criticizing, were leaning forward. And then I said this: if there is one message that echoes forth from this conference, let it be that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights, once and for all.
Can I pause you again for a second?
Yeah.
Just thinking about what we read with Francis, and about how we've seen the caring and the nurturing, and that the dignity of their ability to give life, in other words, produce babies. So when you keep or maintain inequality, you might call it equality. I think they call it equality because women get to go into the workforce. And we can now buy cars, and we can buy a home, and we can, all these things. But there's so many still, the pay gap and the job market, and so many places where inequality exists. But imagine if you keep inequality, where you keep women in a weakened position or state, or a suppressed or oppressed state, then in patriarchy, you have to protect them because they're weak and needy.
You'll strengthen patriarchy if you do that.
But I mean, I'm looking from from the side of patriarchy, to be able to maintain the inequality keeps women in a weakened or suppressed or oppressed state, where they require the superior, the male, to look over them, provide and protect, be the leader. And what women are not weak. They are capable of the things that men are capable of. So when you remove inequality, and when you have a society of equality, there's no need for a protector. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You mind if we bring in the Sabbath?
Sure, please go ahead. Thank you.
We thank you, most Holy and mighty God, for this beautiful preparation day that leads into your holy Sabbath, Lord. And we thank you for providing that for us and always providing that. We pray and that we honor that gift that you've given us, that blessing. And we also ask for your holy presence, Lord, throughout our proceedings, and to help us to be clear of mind and to let your message enter into our hearts, Lord. And we pray for those that couldn't attend today, and we also pray for the leadership. And we pray this in your holy name, in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking about that, how they want to keep women in this. Oh, trying to think how to say it. In a mindset that, because when it comes to the women that support patriarchy and that go along with it, they want to keep women in this mindset of need a protector, instead of understanding the mindset of equality, that we can do anything men can do. So that when you keep them in that, then in their eyes, you have to have a protector, right? You're this weak, needy person that has to have somebody watch over and protect you and provide for you. Even if you can still have a job now, you've gotten some concessions, why can't you be happy with the concessions that you've gotten? And it's the same thing with race and nationalism.
And all that comes back to the sins of the fathers, because those people that participate in that have learned that from past generations as they pass it down generation to generation to generation.
Yeah, and when you take that and look at racism as well, it's, yeah, state of dependency. Thank you. So you take that and you apply it to racism. What are they saying when it comes to race? Aren't you satisfied? You have your rights, you have this, you have that, you have your rights. No, you don't. We still live in, you go through the whole Jim Crow laws and you still see all this existing. They just do it, they just change the way they do it, and yet they still do it.
Yeah.
And they say the same thing then to women. Why can't you be satisfied with what you've got? Because like as within race, as within women, as in within also the LGBTQ community, is not equality. It is some tokens that are handed out to deceive some people, like we were reading with the counterfeit, the illusion of equality. If you could just snuff out those radicals that keep putting ideas in people's minds, we'd all be fine. I'm being sarcastic.
They don't understand what true equality is.
Well, maybe they do. Then they don't, it's a threat to them. I don't know, go ahead, finish, sorry.
If they did understand what true equality means, then it would take too much of a sacrifice for them. So they're happy to give a little and try to make you think you're getting a lot. But it's not true equality. They know it's not true equality, but they want you to be happy with what you have now, because you didn't have this, before. So now you have some equality. They know it's not real equality. They want you to be they want you, they think you're stupid and you don't truly know, but they know you know. But they have to sort of make up, it's just like like the Republican Party, they think we don't know, but we know. It's so plain and simple. But it's like, I used to have this friend that had this mother that was just very abusive, and my friend got into an accident as a child, and he got a brain damage, like he actually had a big hole in his head, and he got he had to have brain surgery. And ever since then, he was a little, like he was not right. He just had problems with attitude and stuff. And she would always say, well, he's just like that. He's got an attitude, and I'm not falling for it. And then I would wonder in my mind, I got good friends with her, and I started to understand why his mother wouldn't admit that it's not that he's just a bad kid. It's just, he fell off a horse and his head hit a pole and he had to have brain surgery. He's got serious brain problems. But you see, if she had to agree with that, that would mean that maybe somehow it was her fault that, she wasn't there when he was climbing up on the horse, and then the horse, it would have made her look like a bad mother. And so I realized that she didn't want to agree or admit that the accident that he had when he was 3 years old affected his attitude as he was growing up. So in order to not take that responsibility on her, for herself, that maybe she wasn't attentive, or maybe for some reason, maybe she might not have been there. She refused to believe that maybe he's the way he is because he's got brain damage in his frontal lobe, and he's never going to be like everybody else. If she agreed to it, then that would mean that she should take him to the doctor, and maybe he should go to scans, and maybe he should do all these, maybe she has a responsibility to see that he gets the care that he needs throughout his life. She wouldn't do that.
That's really sad.
Isn't that sad? Because if she did agree that maybe he's this way because he's got brain damage, but she refused. She just would say, no, he's just a bad kid. Wow. He's just got a really bad attitude, and I'm not buying it anymore. And so I think sort of like these people, patriarchal people, whether they're male or female, because, women can be very patriarchal, as we can see, because, with the conservatives and Republicans, it's not just women, men. There are women there too. They're just as patriarchal in many ways. They bought into it. They believe that women have their place. They believe that women, you have enough freedoms. Why do you need more? Because if they were to agree with the fact that, no, we don't have enough. No, then they would have to give in. They would have to agree. Oh, okay, but they won't. They can't. Because if they do, it'll cost them too much.
Yeah, and I think that they do know what they're doing. I was remembering back, I think Christina and I talked about it this morning. Maybe you can help me remember, or maybe it was something I was watching. Ronald Reagan, back in the Reagan administration. Maybe we talked about it on Wednesday night, can't remember. But in the Reagan administration, if anybody remembers that he gutted, he's the one that put in place the EEOC, Clarence Thomas, if I remember correctly, or maybe that came later. I think that came later. But Reagan gutted the Reagan administration of radicals, radical feminists. So even though he publicly professed women's rights, it was the same thing we just read, tokens from the papacy. It's tokens that they give. And so had he left in place some of those radicals, those radical feminists in high positions, he didn't want any, he saw them as biased, and they would be damaging to the government and the institutions to put their bias in there. So it pulled them out. I think they know what they're doing. And when we look at what we started with at the beginning of the study with homage, that it's going to be an observance, we know, right? But with paying homage to the papacy, if the papacy gives these little women their tokens, sarcasm, and you have the United States doing the same thing, then the United States pays homage to the papacy.
That's scary close,
Yeah,
you know. When I finished, well, I'll start the previous paragraph so we can remember where we were left off.
I think you're, as I went on, because you read that about the speech playing. You might have read this, but you definitely read this one here.
Yeah. As I went on, I could feel a change in the atmosphere. Delegates, even or especially from countries I was criticizing, were leaning forward, and then I said this: if there is one message that echoes forth from this conference, let it be that human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights, once and for all.
Yeah, that was what you did read. So it reminds me of the final test. You
Yeah.
have gender rights, the test of gender. And she is making the point that it's all inclusive. The UN made the point that it's all inclusive.
Yeah. When I finished, the room erupted into cheers. The delegates rose, giving me a standing ovation.
Rarity.
A rarity at but not UN gatherings. As I left the hall, women hugged over banisters to grab my hand. Some had tears in their eyes. The declaration of a simple, obvious message should perhaps not have had such a galvanizing effect, but 25 years it caused shockwaves. Since 1995, the phrase women's rights are human rights had appeared on tote bags, cell phone cases, needlepoint pillows, and t-shirts. I'm happy about this, but the most transformative moment of the conference wasn't my speech. It was the adoption of the platform for action, whereby representatives from all 189 nations committed to the full and equal participation of women in political, civil, economic, social, and cultural life. A 270-page document might not lend itself to bumper stickers or coffee mugs, but it laid the groundwork for sweeping necessary changes.
So with our understanding of the progression of things, such a document and 189 nations committed to the full and equal participation, what follows?
Well, I guess it's what I see is she started a movement.
Yeah, but based on what we've learned, if you're gonna take that kind of, you're gonna get that kind of action, what comes back at you?
Backlash.
Backlash.
In many ways, women are better off than they were 25 years ago. A girl born 25 years ago in Lesotho could not own property or sign a contract. Today she can. In East Africa, a girl born 25 years ago grew up in a region where female genital cutting was widespread. Since then, the practice has declined significantly. In 1995, domestic violence was a crime in just 13 countries. Today, it is illegal in more than 100. We've nearly closed the global gender gap in primary school enrollment, and marital mortality has dropped by more than half.
Going back to 1994, what we looked at Wednesday with domestic violence, that was when the Violence Against Women Act, I think that was what it's called, was passed, signed into law with Clinton. Biden was a senator at the time, because prior to 1994, domestic violence, even in the United States, wasn't a crime. It was a
Domestic, what do they call it? Domestic,
private matter.
right. But the works is nowhere near done. As the changes laid out in the platform for action have been implemented, what's become clear is that simply embracing the concept of women's rights, let alone enshrining those rights in law and constitution, is not the same as achieving full equality. Rights are important, but they are nothing without power to claim them. In 2017, the Women's March brought millions to the streets to protest sexism and misogyny. More than a decade after the activist Tarana Burke coined the phrase "Me Too," the movement has reached every corner of the world. The coronavirus pandemic, the loss of millions of jobs, and the death of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, along too many others, to promote activists to shine a light on the injustice and the inequality facing communities of color, especially Black women. All of this has a lot to do with rights, but it is also about something more. It's about power. Who has it, who doesn't, and how we confront that imbalance.
Who put that? Somebody put that in the chat. Penny said they would have to give up their privileges. Yeah, and somebody else said power, I think. Back in here. Yeah, Sarah, they do, but they don't want to give up their power. It's about power. Who has it, who doesn't, and how we confront that imbalance.
I remember as a kid, when there was political activism in the 60s and the 70s, they had a saying, it's better to live on my feet than to it's better to die on my feet than to continue living on my knees. And it kind of resonated with me because, like the paragraph says, if you don't have any power, you don't have any rights, you know.
Yeah, yes.
And especially in a country that espouses rights for everybody. Mary Beard dedicated an entire book to this subject. In Women and Power, a manifesto, she explores the misogyny that has shaped our world for centuries and urges readers to reject the notion of power as a zero-sum game. If power is seen as a tool only to a few people who can wield it at a time within systems designed by and for men, an entire gender who forever be excluded from it. Instead, she suggests, why not look at power more comprehensively? We should think of it as the ability to be effective, to make a difference in the world, and the right to be taken seriously, together as much as individuality. I was clear-eyed about the difficulty of making progress 25 years ago. I remain so today, but I am still surprised by the backlashes provoked by women's advancement. Again and again, we've seen anger, hostility, and sexism directed at women who have the audacity to seek power. I have some firsthand experiences with this deep-seated bias as even harder to change than discriminatory laws. It's no coincidence that while we've made progress in areas traditionally associated with women, like healthcare and education, we've struggled to match the progress in the economy, politics, and national security. And as useful as the internet has been to feminist organizing, it has also created a platform for misogyny to spread sexist, vitriol,
Yeah, vitriol.
vitriol, and disinformation.
And that brings to my mind the Vespers classes where she went into talking about Max and men's rights activists and what goes on out there in social media,
Yeah.
how they've used social media to grow.
Yeah, I've come across a few YouTubes of guys talking about men's rights. I'm sure they didn't like my comments. I left them anyways. Today, the pandemic is exacerbating some of the most insidious and pervasive inequities women face. In the US, women who are already more likely than men to do low-wage work, raise a child on their own, and do unpaid work as caregivers, have lost their jobs at a higher rate than men since the onset of the virus. And we know that women will be less likely to return to paid employment than men, threatening that what progress has been made towards equality in the workforce. On top of everything, several states have attempted to weaponize the crisis in order to eliminate access to safe legal abortions. And the Trump administration rules pertaining employers to deny insurance coverage for birth control on the basis of moral objections was upheld by the Supreme Court. One can't help asking, what about coverage for Viagra?
That wasn't a problem.
No, it wasn't. We see similar trends around the globe. A United Nations Population Fund reports predicted that the pandemic could well have a catastrophic impact on women, with millions assuming disproportionate responsibilities for caregiving, unable to access a contraception or at risk of being married off or subjected to genital cutting. Experts have reported a dramatic spike in intimate partner violence. History warns us that a global health and economic crisis can create pressure to push women's concerns to the back burner. Yet, even in the midst of all this turmoil, I still believe that advancing the rights, opportunities, and full participation of women and girls is a great unfinished business of the 21st century. Finishing this work is the right and moral thing to do, and it is also an urgent strategic imperative. We need a global commitment to changing laws and policies, and to transform centuries-old cultural norms around women's roles and value.
I want to pause you there. We might end there, but I want to read what Sarah wrote in here because it brings a lot of thought to my mind. She says was talking to her brother-in-law about the injustices women have been through. And he was like, yeah, we know women have been treated badly and we need to do more to change that. And then mentioned that there are things that will never change because when you give women full rights, they misbehave.
Oh.
Just referring to, remembering what Donna said. So if women were to have full equality, they would misbehave. And, it just makes me think of a bully situation. What really is a bully? I don't know if I'm asking the question right, but what is your idea of a bully?
I guess somebody that I don't know, just
Makes fun of.
overreaches into other people's spaces and whatever else.
What really is a bully? Does anybody? There we go. And
He's
got
a
it.
coward.
They're
A
cowards.
bully is a coward and makes oneself bigger by littling others.
So they're cowards. I'm thinking about that with, using that with, along with Sarah's comment that women will misbehave. It's not that women will misbehave. It's that they'll lose some of their power because it'll be shared equally with women. And so we have to be bullies because we're cowards and we're afraid of women. Is that fair to say?
I don't
Well,
see that.
it's also job security. How many of us have experienced either equal or supervisor won't give out all the information or educate you because it's job security for them? Have any of you experienced that? Or am I the only one?
No,
Yes.
but I can see it.
Yeah, it's job security for men
Right.
to keep the power, to keep the women down. Because if we're no longer protecting and no longer providing, what good are we?
Exactly.
Well, I thought tonight was kind of helpful. Hopefully it was. If we, as we, guess we would compare and contrast the sixth head with the seventh, or well, I don't know if we want to say that because that's a different story. But if we, as we compare the United States with Protestantism or the United States with Catholicism. Sorry, spider just came across my desk. And I don't do well with spiders. With as you compare Protestantism with Catholicism, or as you compare what the United States does with the behavior of the counterfeit. So I thought it would be good to look a little bit at the counterfeit and their views on the views on women's rights and equality. Anybody have, thank you, Francisco, for reading. Maybe we can try to finish that up on Wednesday.
Well, thank you for putting up with me. I haven't read in a while, so.
Did great. Does anybody have any comments they want to share before we close? And thank you for those in the chat that did comment as well. What do we understand now about homage?
That it's the homage is like when it's like when somebody acts like you, you know, they're giving you homage because you're acting like them, kind of thing,
Copying them.
right? You're imitating them. That's what I was trying to say.
And you don't have to like them.
Right.
What were you going to say, Fellow? I think you were going to say something.
You're basically same thing. You're enforcing the behavior of another, being some another power. It's your own, and you're enforcing it. You're enforcing some other's behavior.
Yeah, she said it's in the observance itself, whatever observance, you know, and we can look at the sexism, the misogyny, the inequality, the oppression, the pay gap, abortion rights. I mean, abortion rights and reproductive rights is taking away a human being's power over their own body. Right? So that women don't even have, they don't want women to have power over their own body.
I have can I say a comment real real
Yes,
quick?
please, thank you.
I've shared this view in a few conversations just lately, and what do you the response that I get back is that, well, the body which is in your own body, we're standing up for that particular body, which is not part, they say that is not part of your body, and that human has rights too. The government has to stand up for that little person's rights when the mother doesn't want to stand up for it. You see how they're twisting it in a way to make it seem like it's not a part of your body, but it is. The baby is actually a part and feeding on the mother's body, so it is united as one, like, ecosystem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but still saying that the woman doesn't have the right over her own body, that, I've said this before, don't know if it'll be new to anybody here maybe, but I think several of us women have had abortions. I had an abortion. And this was obviously a long time ago. And I know that it would have changed the direction of my entire life. And you look at women that wind up in these situations, and especially women, there are women that are wind up pregnant and already have kids. They're single moms. Maybe it'd be rape, maybe it's not. But they're single moms and they can't afford another child. There are places where they restrict or make difficult. I'm talking about over the years, and this is what they're headed towards, is to not only not allow abortion, but to not allow, like the Catholic Church, contraception, because that's another thing that they're fighting in this, because Catholic Church doesn't allow
Yes.
contraception, right?
Yeah, the sanctity of life, that's right.
So you can't even prevent from getting pregnant. And then you have whether it be a married couple or what have you, let's take the married couple, and the man is he's the man, he's the one that's in charge, and sex is not about you, it's about him. And you wind up pregnant. What can you do? And that's the issue, going back to Margaret Sanger. Women had no way to prevent getting pregnant. And she watched women die with illegal abortions.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And so to take away your right to even prevent from getting pregnant, you have no rights over your own body.
Yeah, it's like trampling on the freedom of your conscience and your body, because it's like saying that if you think that it's wrong, it's actually trampling on your conscience. So yeah, it's both. Yeah, definitely.
And so say you're a poor woman and you're pregnant, you can't afford another child. The husband's nowhere to be found. And then oh yeah. Anyway, so we should probably close it there.
Yeah, it's
Thank you for your comments. And Sarah says they want to tie women down with baby manufacturing. Yes. See copies 144,000. I don't know about that, but it's a counterfeit. Yeah, so you would say that, yeah. Apostate Protestant pays homage to the papacy. The apostate Protestant, the counterfeit of the papacy. I don't think you can say that. I'm just going back from Elder Tessa's study. And what we have on the board is that you have one counterfeit. because the apostate Protestantism, that would be the ship of the United States that, I don't know if it's right to put that connection there. I mean, it is United States and apostate Protestant, I think you would say. But that ship shipwrecks at Sunday Law, and then you have the counterfeit. But they shipwreck because they copy the papacy. And then, yeah, so, okay. You did make me think, though, when it comes to the papacy copies, it's not papacy, it doesn't copy, but it is a counterfeit to the true, which goes back to Castor and Pollux. So in that, yes, you're right, I had to think about that. So the papacy copies or is a counterfeit of the true, because you had where she had Paul representing the true people of God, or reading, representing God, and then you had Castor and Pollux, the counterfeit. Well, anyways, well, I look forward to continuing this. But tomorrow morning we have Susan, and then I sent out both links. So for the Divine Hour, we'll have Aaron, and there's a separate link for that to join that study. So Sac Fellowship link at 8:30, and then the IPR link at 11. I think it was. Victor, would you like to close us in prayer?
Sure, absolutely. Dear God, we just want to thank you for another opportunity to gather together and study these precious and important truths for this time. Thank you, Lord, for allowing us to understand and comprehend and wrap our minds around these events and these subjects. We ask that you would continue to help us comprehend and build in our experience and grow in our understanding. We ask, Lord, that you would bless those who put forth the efforts tonight to present these presentations. We ask that you would bless them also and encourage them and give us the strength, Lord, to continue to move forward as one, putting our trust in you in all things, giving you glory in all things. We ask that you would watch over us tonight and give us a good night's rest and help us to come together again tomorrow. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.